catch up. Okay. Here we go. All right. So, good evening. Okay. We do that one of these. I'm going to throw it down to you. You just pass it. Okay. So, welcome everyone. And this week, part 3, we are going to talk about Yaakov in Lavan's house. That's how I titled this because the past couple of weeks, we had like Sarah and Abraham, we had Yitzchak and Rivka, but I feel like when talking about family relationships and family dynamics, this week there's really a bunch. There's Yaakov and Lavan, there's Yaakov and Leah, there's Yaakov and Rachel. And we're gonna kind of start from when Yaakov gets to Lavan's house through a little bit after having his children. That's kind of what we're going to discuss tonight. So if you remember from last week we kind of ended with Yaakov having to flee from his brother Esau because he wants to kill him, because he is angry that he tricked him and took his blessing, and lots of discussion whether he really took the intended blessing and all of that, which we got to very briefly, but he has to run away. And he runs away. He has kind of an interaction overnight with God, with the ladder and the angels going up and down. We're not going to really talk about that, but you can just imagine if I asked you, even though God, and here we're kind of in Genesis chapter 29, which is great. This is a great chumash, by the way. I was just flipping through it. It has some nice maps in the back and everything. Yeah. I love things with maps because I'm not so good at maps. So we're going to start around chapter 29, which is page 169. But right before this, right, so even though God has kind of reassured him that he's going to be with him, if I asked you right now, how do you think Jacob is feeling? What emotion would you think he has?
Anxiety.
Right, I think a lot of anxiety. Okay, anything else? Ones that go with that.
Regret.
What? Right, maybe regret or guilt of what he just did, even though it was his mom who kind of, urged him to do it. Maybe he feels, I'm sure he's replaying it in his mind and he feels regret. Maybe I shouldn't have done it, and now here I am. I think he's, anxious, also like afraid what's going to happen to me now. And I think he's also very lonely because this is, of course, my suggestion, but it doesn't sound like, because I don't know if in the times of the Torah, there's a lot of travel and a lot of socializing of like, I know a ton of people and I have a big social circle, but I kind of feel like, he has left his home. And what we're told about Yaakov from beforehand is that he is a person who's kind of a homebody. He is a tam, which is a weird word because it could mean naive, simple. I do think naive will work, and we'll see what we see of Yaakov in the beginning. And I think all those things, like guilty of what he did to his brother, now he's run away, he has to leave his family, like unknown. If you remember, I'll just read it briefly. In the last, when he leaves, his mother says to him, so this is on page 159, his mother, if you flip a little back, his mother says, Rebecca says to Yaakov, your brother Esav is consoling himself by planning to kill you. This is on verse 40, I think the middle of 42. Yes. Now my son, listen to me, flee at once to Haran, to my brother Lavan. Stay with him a while, and your brother's fury subsides, until your brother's anger against you subsides, and he forgets what you have done to him. Then I will fetch you from there. Let me not lose you both in one day. So what she has told him is, you have to go very quickly, and also, and you can't come back till I say it's okay, like till I'll tell you when like the situation has calmed down. So it's not even like he knows, even though she says for a while, we know it's not going to be for a little while, but he doesn't even know when he's going to be able to come back. So all of that is where we meet Yaakov in the beginning here of chapter 29. And this is, so you see, and this is why I think the tam, like kind of tamness of he's naive, comes into play, right? We have this little dialogue in chapter 29 between Jacob and like the people, the townspeople who are gathered at the well. which is very interesting. We have a lot of stories, people, when they come to a new place, right, they go to the well. One, because they need water, I think, from their journey. And also that's where that's where people are hanging out. That's where you can ask people, news. That's where you can find out if somebody knows somebody. And therefore he comes to the well. So if you look in verse 4, he says, Achai, it's even better in Hebrew. Here they do my friends, but it's really like Israeli slang, they say Achi, like my brother, right? Like he's trying to be friendly. My friends, where are you from? And you see, he's like, I think, of course, this is my suggestion, but I think that he's being friendly, and they are very terse in how they respond to him. And they say, Haran anachnu, right? We're from Haran. And he says, do you know Lavan, the son of Nahor? And they say, yes. Yes, we do. But no extra information. So I always read this as here's, Yaakov with those feelings, anxious, lonely, and he's reaching out to them. And they are just very not interested to be his friend or to be any extra information. And he continued, is he well? And they said, yes, he is. And here's his daughter coming with a flock, which is a little bit to me like they're kind of passing him off now. We're not interested to talk to you. Here's Rachel, just go ask her your questions. And then this I find also interesting, because this whole exchange, we don't necessarily need it in the Torah. If I didn't have it, his back and forth with these shepherds, they are shepherds, I think, I don't know what I would be missing. So I think it's showing something about Yaakov. And then he says, it is still broad daylight, too early to round up the animals, water the flock and take them to pasture. So I find this very interesting. So what is he doing here? What is he telling the shepherds that he just met, that he was asking about if they know Lavan, and what is he telling them? He's saying you're not, what are you doing? He's giving them advice on their shepherding techniques, right? And the commentators do say that Yaakov himself was a shepherd. In the Torah, it says, Tam Yoshev Ohalim. He was kind of naive or simple or pure, and he would sit in tents, but a lot of commentators interpret that to mean that he's a shepherd. There's other passages in the Torah where a tent has to do with being a shepherd. So maybe he also has his own experience, but he's telling them what to do. And they say, we cannot until all the flocks are rounded up. Then the stone is rolled off the mouth of the well and we water the sheep. So this is an interesting exchange. I mean, you could say we have it because what happens afterwards, he himself, Yaakov, in verse 10, rolls the stone off. He's so excited that now he's meeting Rachel that he gets all this energy to adrenaline to do it himself. Maybe that's why we have to know it. But I think it's a little bit of to me, it's telling us about Yaakov, and he is kind of starving for now, to feel like he has some connection to somebody, because he has left it all behind, and that's very scary for him. So now we see he meets Rachel, super excited, right? He kisses her and he breaks into tears. He told Rachel that he was her father's kinsman, right? I'm related to you, I'm Rebekah's son, and she ran and told her father. And then on hearing the news of his sister's son, Jacob, Lavan ran to greet him, he embraced him and he kissed him and he took him into his house. Okay, now, if you remember Lavan from before, right, we know that Lavan so far, even though you have to read into it a little bit, but commentaries, I think, pick up on it, that when Eliezer, the servant of Abraham, comes and and he chooses Rebecca, and then she brings him home. Lavan, it says that he runs out to greet him after he sees her jewelry that she has just gotten. She gets a nose ring and bracelets from Eliezer, and they hint to that. They pick up on that, and they say, you know what? Because he's a money-hungry person, and he's sneaky, and he's very interested in materialistic things. So some of the commentaries say that he runs to greet him, he kisses him and he hugs him because he's trying to see where his money is, he's feeling for it. I don't know if you have to say that, go so far, maybe he was, but if he knows that he is Rivka's son, and he remembers that when Rivka left to marry Yitzchak, right, that servant came with all that wealth and said, oh, Abraham is so wealthy and has all of this stuff, so he's probably thinking, okay, well, here comes her son, so he also has wealth. So I think it makes sense in the same way that he's running out to greet him. And here we have a great line, which is in Pasuk 13. Yeah, 13, but kind of at the end. It says, V'yasaper Lavan et kol hadvarim ha'eleh. He told Lavan all that had happened. Okay, so what do you think that means? Just off the top of your head, like, what did he tell him? Like, to sum it up quickly, like, what did he tell him? He said he told him everything that had happened. Like his whole life story, right? He told him everything. And I think it means, right, he told him everything, like, about his brother and about the bracha and how he, like, you know, his mom told him to do it and now he wants to kill him, so he has to run away. Like, he tells him everything. And that's what it says. And I think that makes sense because here he feels like, here's family and this is where I'm going to find my place. And here's my uncle, and I can trust him. And, you know, I tell him everything. You know, we as the reader, I think, would say, don't tell him everything, right? Don't tell him.
Leave out a few details.
Right, leave out all the stuff that's kind of negative to you, about you, because maybe he's going to use it against you after. But you can see and hear this takes me back to like when, you know, I never really know what to think of when they say Yaakov was an Ish Tam. Lots of commentators say he was also like learning, which I never really connect with because I don't know what he's learning, or he's a spiritual person. But now I feel like maybe he is this kind of, there's this, you know, like he's a little bit naive of like, and a little too trusting, which I think he will grow out of that, which I see many of us do with life experience, right? But he's a little too trusting. And okay, so if you look at the commentary in source number 1, that's what Rashi says. He doesn't say he's too trusting, but he says, what did he tell him? He told Lavan that he had come only because he was forced to do so by his brother, and that all of his money had been taken from him. So first of all, now Lavan's like, uh-oh, disappointed. Now, interesting, you see, if I asked you, right, why does he have no money? What would you say? Like, why did he come with no money?
Because he was escaping.
Right, because he's running off and he's just grabbing a bite. He might have really not, the way I even think that the Torah makes it sound like it was like,
In the dark of the night,
right, just grab a few things, right, and you really have to go on your way. But just I brought this as an aside, the Rashi underneath, you see this Rashi is from a little before where he meets Rachel and it says that he cried when he meets her. So Rashi says he cries because he came without any gifts to give her. And then Rashi quotes a midrash that says that he didn't leave empty-handed from his house. He left with a lot of stuff, but then Esav's son was chasing him. His name was Eliphaz, because Esav had said, go chase him and kill him. And then when Eliphaz caught up to him, he didn't want to kill him because he had this like good influence from growing up in Yitzchak's home. So he said, well, what should I do? My father has commanded me to kill you. So Jacob replied, take all that I have, right? If you take all my possessions, all my wealth, then you can say that I am dead, because we say that a poor man is like a dead man. So that's just an interesting midrash that I think is, you know, if you're like, that's what Rashi quotes to kind of explain why he lost all his money. I personally think you just could say that he just left in a hurry and didn't take a lot of money with him, like, because it wasn't a prepared trip. But it's just it's one of these midrashim that it's a little bit popular that I have heard.
It's a little bit weird also because you would think Esav, out of all these characters, would be the one who would like want it to be personal as opposed to like sending someone else.
Right, although he does send his son, but he also says, I'm gonna wait until like my father dies, like he says it himself. I think this midrash is highlighting the anger that Esav feels, right? I don't personally think it's true. And also like the influence of perhaps, you know, there's positive influence in being in Yitzchak's house. Also for Esav, we know that Esav was very respectful of his father. I think that's what this midrash is a little about, but it ties in a little bit if another option of why Yaakov has no money. Okay, so Yaakov has no money, but he's told, I really like the reason I brought this Rashi is to highlight, right? But he told him everything. And you see in source number 2, the Sforno kind of says in a different language that he did, right? He told Lavan that he had not come to him because he needed a job, but rather because he was escaping from the wrath of his brother, and his mother had told him to go to Lavan. Like he's telling him all the nitty-gritty details of the family fight. And he is sharing it with Lavan. And we see that Lavan will then, I think, use that, I think, against him as we move forward in the story, knowing this is his weakness, like he feels bad about it. There's guilt, there's anxiety. He wants to be accepted into this family because he knows he can't go home. Like Lavan knows all those details now. Okay, so now we see he stays with Lavan for a month time. We're now skipped a little bit to verse 14. And Lavan says to Yaakov, just because you are a kinsman, right? Just because you're a relative, should you serve me for nothing? Tell me, what shall your wages be? So I always think that sounds kind of nice. Like, you shouldn't work for free, Yaakov. But if you look at source 3, so Tzvi Grummet, he says it's kind of tricky because by saying that, by offering to pay him for his services, it seems generous, but it's actually saying you're not 100% family. Like, you're just a little bit on the outside still. And now we see what he requests. So he says, okay, what are your wages going to be? Jacob loved Rachel, so he answered, I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter, Rachel. So this is very interesting.
Says serve you, does it mean he's going to serve him for his daughter instead of pay?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Meaning he's not going to take literal money. He's going to work for him like for free. I guess maybe there's room and board involved. And then he will, then at the end of these 7 years, he will marry. So if you look at there's two sources we're going to look at here. 3, and then I put 5 and 5. 4 will be something else. It's not really an order. I thought it was, but it's not. So Tzvi Grummet continues. Jacob's response is clear. He wishes to formalize the family embrace, moving his way into the inner circle of Lavan's family and cementing his place there. His palace, but it's supposed to be place. Driven by his love for Rachel, he requests her hand in marriage in return for 7 years' labor. So it's like maybe Lavan knows like Yaakov wants to be accepted and part of the family. So he, maybe because he knows all this already, is speaking to him that way. And it's like Yaakov takes the bait, right? He doesn't say, okay, pay me, I don't know, 100 silver coins he says, okay, I want to marry your daughter. Now also, seems he loves her, because then he'll legitimately like be in the family. And then if you look at source number 5, this I find a fascinating idea, which is, and I never used to think of it, right? Since we're little, we learn, oh, he says, I'll work for you for 7 years. And we're just like, great, that's a great idea. But Shmuel Klitzner, who has a great book on like the psychological analysis of Yaakov, he calls this outlandish servitude. And he says, if you think about it, it's like such a large amount of years, like so many years. He says, it's not really reasonable. Rebecca has sent him and she must send for him. Outlandish servitude is what he believes he deserves, not because it is a reasonable arrangement with Lavan, but because it is the unspoken penance for his crime against Esau. I never thought about it this way till I read this, which I think makes so much sense. Like maybe it's conscious or not even conscious, and he feels guilty about what he did. So he will kind of, what is he saying? I'll be a servant, like, kind of, right? I'll work for you. I will not get paid because I deserve some kind of like.
But I read it that he says he requests her hand in marriage in return for 7 years' labor. We'll get married now and I'll work for you for 7 years.
Well, some people say that's true. It's unclear if he worked for 7 years and then he married one, then he worked another 7 years and he married the other. Or some people say he kind of married them both one after the other and then just worked all along.
Well, because it just says I'll give her hand in marriage in return for 7 years. In the Chumash,
it sounds like he works. No, he works for 7 years because you see, so Jacob served 7 years for Rachel and they seemed to him but a few days. So he works 7 years. What's unclear is if he has to wait another 7 years to marry Rachel or if he marries her soon after the Leah marriage and then he works another 7 years. Either way, he works two sets of 7 years.
He was stuck for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah, so he says I'm gonna work for 7 years, and it could be right. He has these feelings, and also he also, and we'll keep this in mind also with the whole switch that's coming up, right? He, like it says in the source, but we know this, has to wait for his mom to call him back. So he's a little bit stuck there, which means he has to, even though he might have, we'll see this come up really soon again, might not like what's going on, even though nothing has really gone on yet, because he's the one who's saying, I'll work for 7 years, right? Lavan did not suggest it, but he knows, I want to be accepted here because I don't know how long I'm going to be here. Did you want to say something?
I just said a couple things. One, first, that in saying 7 years kind of really drives home the point that he does think he's going to be there for a long time. Because if he thought his mom was going to call him back, in 2 months, why would he have agreed to stay for 7 years?
Right.
And the other thing I was thinking is maybe part of it is also sort of as an apology for not bringing any presents. He's sort of funding Lavan's dowry for his daughter.
Right. So all these reasons, right? All those together could be. We have maybe guilt. Maybe he's trying to make up for the fact that he didn't come with any money, so he's going to do that. All of those together, he offers the 7 years, and Lavan says, "Great." Although you see how he answers him in verse 19. Better that I give her to you than I should give her to an outsider. But that is not a very warm response. It's like, all right, right, you're here.
You can do worse.
Right, I could do worse. And maybe that's all.
Welcome to the family.
Right, it's not welcome to the family. He gives him a hug. It's
Yeah,
okay, right, you're not so bad, which is interesting because he's wanting, if we go with that idea that he's wanting to fit in, Lavan, and if Lavan, which I think we always think Lavan is pretty smart, is just not going to make him feel 100%. Okay.
I mean, they're family, but they didn't live together. They didn't know.
They are family.
I know they're family, but they don't know each other.
Right. And we don't think Lavan is nice, like a nice, kind person. Okay. So he does work 7 years. Great. Then Yaakov says, okay, now I'm ready. Give me my wife. I worked for 7 years. Lavan gathers all the people of the place. He makes a feast. When evening came, he took his daughter Leah and brought her to him, and he cohabited with her, or he sleeps with her. Lavan had given his maidservant Zilpah to his daughter Leah as her maid. When morning came, there was Leah. Surprise. So he said to Lavan, what is this you have done to me? I was in your service for Rachel, right, for Rachel. Why did you deceive me? Lavan says, it is not the practice in our place to marry off the younger before the older. So forget any commentary, which we'll talk about in a minute, but that is, right, here is, I think, where Lavan takes the info that he has already all the info he knows about Yaakov's background, and he it's like a zinger, like a stab in the back. Oh, yes, okay, I made that arrangement with you, but here we don't do that. What he's really saying is where you are from, right? You took the oldest goes before the younger. The younger is taking the place of the older one and taking his blessing. Here, that's not our practice, right? The older always goes first. Wait until the bridal week of this one is over, and we'll give you that one too, provided you serve me another 7 years. So it sounds like that he has the bridal week, right? The Shava Brachot. Then he also marries Rachel, but he has to work another 7 years. Okay, now here's the question, which is a little bit of a side question, just to think about it. Why or how did Yaakov not realize that it was Leah?
Yeah, this is veiled.
She was veiled all along, till the evening.
Oh, no, at the wedding.
Yeah, okay, but meanwhile, she sleeps, right? He sleeps with the wrong woman.
It's dark.
So how does she know? No, so that could be an answer.
It's dark.
It's dark.
There's no lights in the tent.
Right, so in the back of your handout, although they came out very tiny, sorry, but if you look at the back, there's this page that's so it's from this book, which is it's a fabulous book, but you really need I didn't realize it was going to come out so tiny. So I apologize about that, but we'll before you even look at it, it's good because you really can't see it. I have a big version of it here that I copied directly from the book, but anyone have any ideas? Just if you think about it, how would he not know? So I think that's an idea, right? Think about the times, we don't know, right? Maybe she was veiled, and maybe
He was nervous.
the party's separate. I don't, it could be that he really doesn't see her. And then she comes into the room and he just assumes.
Wasn't it sex, even now with the very front, it's done in the dark?
Yeah,
You
it
have
is
no
dark.
lights.
Yeah, right, so it's
So-
in the dark, right, so it could be that, like, she's really not involved, like, he doesn't, it's dark, and maybe she wasn't even really at, like, and also today
Maybe she wanted
even,
him.
maybe they have separate kind of celebrations, party for men, party for women, it could be that. I want to read, well, you can read it yourself, but I'm gonna read it because it's very small. But, so there's this classic commentary, which you may have heard of, which said that, right, how did he marry the wrong girl? How did it happen? That there were signs that he had made, I never heard that he had made signs with Rachel, because he kind of knew that maybe they would try to do something sneaky. But then Rachel felt so bad for her sister Leah that she gave her the signs. Someone ever heard that? Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. So what's interesting is if you look, well, you can look, or I can just read you, but in number 5 here, where it says vocal impressions. This is like one step further. I think it's fascinating. It says the sages of the Talmud go to great lengths to explain how Jacob is fooled. They emphasize in precise detail Rachel's role in advancing the deceit and preserving her sister's dignity. The Midrash even goes so far as to suggest, wait for it, that Rachel is under the conjugal bed, filling in vocally whenever a verbal reply to Jacob is necessary. In that case, hearing Rachel's voice, while visually, in the dark, would help explain Jacob's failure to identify Leah. That part, interestingly, when I learned this in elementary school, they did not teach that part. They did not say she was under the bed making noises, right, or using her voice, right? They said, but they gave that she gave the signs, right? So, Joshua Gap Filler is also attempting to draw a parallel between Lavan's deceit of Yaakov and Yaakov's deceit of Yitzchak, where Yaakov's voice was his disguised physical appearance, which is interesting. Like we have this constant kind of theme of deceit, right? Yaakov has deceived his father, and then Yaakov is deceived. He will also be deceived later on with Yosef. We'll talk about that next week. So I just find that it's a fascinating idea. I also, when the Midrash, gets into the nitty gritty, like that's how it was. It also could be, interestingly, there's another idea that maybe she was wearing maybe it was the custom that she was wearing this kind of like really like thick veil or some kind of mask, and she was very modest, and that's what women of that time did. So there's other ideas that they have, but it's just interesting, like, you wonder, because that is a question of like, we have this vision that if it's like a wedding like we have today, and there's the bride and the groom, and like but yes, but it's dark, and maybe like they didn't really see each other during that, like the whole wedding, and she's veiled, and right, so we have all of that. Okay, so in the morning, right, he sees that it is not Rachel, it is Leah. And she says to Lavan, now we're on page 172, verse 26, right, how could you deceive me? And Lavan says, right, it's not the practice in our place to marry off the younger or the elder, wait until the bridal week is over, and then you'll work for another 7 years. And what is Jacob's reaction? So even though he has said to Lavan, what did you do? Then Lavan says, oh, just work for me another 7 years, and then I'll give you Rachel too. Yaakov, he does it, right? He does it. Jacob did so. He waited out the bridal week of the one, and then he gave him his daughter Rachel as wife.
But it says that he married her then, and then he worked 7 years.
Right, so it could be, it's like he got married to Leah, the switch.
Then a week later.
Then he marries Rachel. But he has to work now another 7 years. So yes, he doesn't have to wait another 7 years, but now he has 2 wives and another 7 years of working in front of him. Okay. Now, question. Why do you think, we'll see it in some of the verses, but just think about it. Why do you think he does not, really argue with Lavan? Like he could have said, no, like, let's annul this marriage with Leah. Let's bring it to court, right? All the people who are at the wedding, like, I don't know, why it seems like he says it at first, like he's upset about it, and he speaks up to Lavan, but then he just backs off, and he just does what Lavan says.
Well, because he got Rachel also.
Right, he does get Rachel, but he also gets Leah, okay?
Maybe he doesn't want to hurt Leah.
Right, so it could be that he just feels bad, and he's just a nice guy, right? He knows it's gonna be how embarrassed, plus like he already slept with her, so I think that makes her like damn.
But what you said at the beginning, that he's a little simple man, he was
But not simple, like he doesn't think straight.
Oh, okay, I
Like, I
thought
don't think we
maybe
think
he
he
was just
was like
saying,
the guy
I'll be a
who wants
nice
to
guy,
save
I
it.
got Rachel anyhow, so.
Okay, so maybe that, okay, and I think your point
I
is.
don't mean simple dumb, I
Right.
mean just, you know.
And I think the point also, like, he is really stuck at Lavan's house, and he does not want to have a contentious relationship with him, because I guess he's thinking, what if he, okay, maybe he won't, because now I married his daughter, but like, I have to be on good terms. He's my father-in-law. So even though he speaks up at first, right, he backs off, and now he has,
Maybe he
Two
thinks
wives.
he deserves it too.
ah,
Just like-
yes,
Maybe.
oh,
What did you
right.
say?
Maybe he feels like he deserves to have been tricked.
Right, because he was yes, tying into the other commentary, yes, all of that. So here is Yaakov, I always feel kind of sad for him. And then, so now he has his 2 wives. And it says in verse 30, this is important, that are in the Hebrew too. It says, Ve'avo gam el Rachel, right, he goes to Rachel and he sleeps with her. V'yahev gam et Rachel mi Leah. He loves Rachel more than Leah. And he served him another 7 years. So they don't have it in the English. In the English, they write indeed. But in the Hebrew, I think you really can translate it as, and he loved also Rachel more than Leah, which tells you, right, just that language tells you, because we always, I think also when we're younger and we learn the story, we always feel like he really doesn't like Leah and he loves Rachel. I think we all agree from the text itself that he likes Rachel, loves Rachel, and he loves her more. But the language, Ve'ahav gam et Rachel, and he loved Rachel too. Right, too means
Also.
he did not hate Leah. He loved her
But
or
next,
likes her.
The next pasuk, it says that God sees that she's hated.
Yes,
So,
yes,
yeah.
good point, right. So what does that mean, right? It seems like he likes her or he loves her, but he marries Rachel, and like, if we're gonna compare, right, Rachel's the winner, right? He loves her more. But then he serves another 7 years.
It also doesn't say who doesn't love her.
Right. It doesn't say that he doesn't love her.
No,
So,
it says, Hashem saw that Leah was
yes, in the
unloved.
next verse,
It doesn't say unloved by whom.
but who do you think it means? So how else would you interpret it, maybe?
You could also say, maybe Rachel is mad at her now.
Ah, oh, that's interesting. I never thought that. Although Rachel, I think, is mad at her at the end. I mean, as we move on. Okay, so what we have is, let's review, I think from the Pshat, we could say that perhaps he loves Leah, whatever that means, right? But and then he marries Rachel, and he definitely loves Rachel more. And then somehow they're 7 years, and sometime in those 7 years, he has now Leah is unloved. So then you wonder,
But the Nuah isn't even unloved, it's like hated,
yeah, unloved, right? Okay, let's say hated. Right, so something shifts. And I think this is always like a fascinating question, because I think we always assume that he just doesn't like Leah and then he really dislikes Leah. But why would he hate her?
Maybe that's what Miriam's saying, maybe Rachel's the one who hates her, not Yaakov. That God sees that she's hated, but it could be
Rachel.
Because she was forced on him?
Well, that's maybe why he doesn't like her. I think, all right, here's gonna be a suggestion. Here, you have it here in source number 9. I always I think this makes a lot of sense. Okay, so this is from this book, Jacob's Family Dynamics. You see there's some dots in there because I kind of took a little bits and pieces. So his view is that he has these feelings that grow, and they're all about, as we saw, he did not really do anything about the switch, right? He wanted to marry Rachel, he ends up with Leah, now he has both of them. We'll see that they, as sisters, not even so much having to do with him, although also having to do with their relationship with him, but they are very jealous and competitive with each other. And now he's kind of in the middle of that. And he doesn't really know, and then it's what they really develop, we just do not have time for it, like, what does Yaakov think happened? But you're Yaakov, and now you thought you were going to marry Rachel, and now you married Leah. So he really doesn't know who did it. Was it Lavan? Was it maybe Rachel, who gave her the signs and did it because she felt bad, but now he's kind of stuck with Leah and Rachel? Was it Leah? You can imagine that he's never going to come out and ask anybody outright, because maybe he's too nice, right? This back to being Tom. He doesn't want to mess up his situation. Gadishi suggests, right? He can't, like, when he thinks about who he's going to direct his bitterness, he calls it. He does it, he says to Leah, were he to vilify Lavan, he would risk being ousted to Canaan. Feels like, well, I can't be mad at Lavan because then he might throw me out. Were he to vilify Rachel, Jacob would risk damaging his precious relationship with her. Right? And I love her, so I don't want to have negative feelings towards her, and I don't want to be angry at her, so I'm going to like kind of squash those down. But here's Leah, and that's kind of like, I always talk about it like when I teach like a whack-a-mole, right? I hope some like that game. Like, I have this stress of like, who did it to me and what happened, and I think maybe it's Lavan, but I don't want to be mad at him, and maybe it's Rachel, but I don't want to be mad at her. So I put my like anger slowly, like it's towards Leah, because she's like a little bit like an easy target. Marginalizing Leah leaves Rachel emotionally available and Lavan friendly. As time passes, Jacob's emotional reversal towards Leah reflects his siding with the option that the switch primarily benefits Leah and perhaps is even the product of Leah's initiative. Lavan may have been the actual mastermind behind the switch, but for Jacob, that conclusion is not emotionally convenient or not as emotionally comfortable as blaming Leah. So long as Jacob needs to live with Lavan, Rachel's father, on a daily basis, Jacob prefers to view Leah and not Lavan as the true schemer. And he says, like, he has this frustration, what happened, and he will channel it towards Leah, even though that might not be true either. But that's what he will do. Jacob's frustration is constant, not only because Leah's presence is a physical reminder of the conjugal switch, but also because he is constantly forced to share himself with Leah and her children. All of the above explains how Jacob grows from loving Leah to actually hating her. Now, the Torah just like, of course that is like a suggestion, because we just went from, oh, I think he likes her or loves her, to God saw that she was like, and that's true, it says unloved, but snua is a really strong word of like, and God saw that she was hated.
So after I said that, it says in here, like in the commentary, that when they're talking about co-wives, it doesn't actually mean hated.
Oh, that it
just
means less.
love.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know.
You can read it that way. I personally think that he did. And the reason I think that is then you see in her naming of her children, it's kind of reflected in that. But I think it's interesting that maybe over I don't know how many years, because I'm not sure exactly, like over the 7 years when Leah had her children, it seems like she had them very quickly one after the other. But let's say, I don't know, it was a few years till she had children, let's just say. Right, so in that time, that he is building up this frustration to the point where Leah feels it. And you see, right, how does she name her children? So on source 10, and we're just going to read it in here, but source 10 is the naming of the children, the first bunch of children that Leah has. So you see, the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, and he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. Leah conceived and bore a son and named him Reuben, for she declared, God has seen my affliction. It also means now my husband will love me.
I mean, if he was so upset with Leah, he made her pregnant a lot of times.
Yeah, but I hate to say that, but like in the Torah times, like that is not a big, first of all, it's very important they want to have children, right? They want to have children and, right. And I don't think, right. And also like, I mean, you might say,
wait so long?
What?
Why did Yaakov wait so long to have a family?
Well, I don't know if he waited so long. It's
He
unclear.
offered to work for 7 years.
Yeah, but
and his Esau already had kids. I'm like, I don't
Maybe he
know.
thought Lavan wouldn't agree to anything less.
No, but why do you think he's waiting so long? I'm saying.
Well, because Esau already had a family.
Oh,
and
you
he's
mean
already
back?
40
He's
years
always
old,
married.
at
Yes.
least.
Yeah, that's true.
What?
You mean like previously? You mean like before he left to come here?
Yeah.
Because if he's 40, then he's 40.
Yeah.
Because they're twins.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know. That's a good question. Yeah, that is a good question. Because
So she had the children only after he was married to Rachel, because it says she was barren and he opened her womb. So for the 7 years they were married before there were no children?
No,
They weren't
unclear.
married
No,
for 7 years.
no, they're married. He works for 7 years. No one's married, right?
Oh,
He's
okay,
not, and
all
then
right,
he
then they
marries
married
one,
together,
and then
okay.
really like one after the other,
Right.
and then there's another working of 7 years. But during those 7 years, you're
Okay,
assuming
so
that
he
he's having
didn't
these children.
Okay, he didn't
Right.
marry and then work 7 years.
Right. So you see that like, so Reuben is named, God has seen my affliction, now my husband will love me. Okay, I always find it fascinating in the Torah, we name children sometimes for these terrible situations. Like, we don't do that today. Like, we don't say, I'm gonna name you bankruptcy, because when you were born, we had no money. Like, you know, like, we don't do that. But in the Torah times, sometimes we have these terrible names. For example, a classic, Ikavod, like
What name?
Ikavod, which
Yeah.
means like lack of honor. Like,
Right.
Oh my God.
we have some names that are just very circumstantial like this, but she names him Reuven because, right, it's like she says now, like she's feeling, she senses that Yaakov doesn't dislikes her, hates her, and she's saying, okay, when I have children now, Rachel's not having children, I'm gonna have children, and that's gonna draw him close, which, you know, we see that people, I think even in modern times, think often that when they have issues in their relationship, like, oh, we'll have a baby and that will help. You know, Rhoda, you're a psychiatrist. But I will say with my pop psychology knowledge, I do not think that's a good
It
idea.
does not often work.
Right, it does not often work. And here's what Leah is saying. Now, right, so that's son number one. Then she has another son, and she calls him Shimon, because God has heard that I am hated. So first it's like God sees, right, sees kind of like sees my affliction, now God hears. So it doesn't sound like things are getting so much better, or it's just kind of continuing. The next son, she calls him Levi. This time my husband will be joined to me, because I have borne him 3 sons. And then she conceives again, Yehuda, and she says, now I'm going to praise the Lord. And then she has like a break from having children. Now, in source number 11, which is, or Samson Frau Hirsch, he kind of notes this. He brings this up. He has a very positive view of it. He says it's like a progression, and it is true. Every time she has a child, like she gets kind of closer, which is why by the last one, with Yehuda, she says, I'm just going to thank God. Like she doesn't say anything about the relationship with the husband, because things have gotten better. So that's an interesting approach. I would think that might be true, but I, in my own reading of the Torah, would say that was short-lived. It could have been like a little break, and maybe, you know, also sometimes people, I think in relationships like Yaakov's like, okay, I have these children, I'm going to try. But I think there's just a lot of tension in the whole family dynamic that it doesn't, I don't think it lasts, even though Rav Hirsch, he doesn't really comment if it lasts or not. I don't really think it lasts.
I always thought that was more that she just gave up. Not that it got better, but that she just stopped wanting it so much, and she just accepted it and stopped worrying about his reaction, and was just happy with what she had.
Right. Okay, that's a nice idea. I like that. Although we'll see,
I
like
think it's a nice idea that she sort of quit on it, but she just stopped worrying about him and started.
Right.
I don't.
Yes.
That's how I
Although,
always
and maybe
thought
that's
of
true.
the
Maybe our
story.
focus stopping on him, because now we will see in the next, the last few minutes in the last couple of stories that the focus now will be on like her sister. So far we've seen, right, in this dynamic, which is, as we say every week, we see dynamics that are quite dysfunctional and sad a little bit. But we have Yaakov with Lavan, where he's kind of, I think, feels negative towards him, but he's not going to say anything. Then we have Yaakov with Leah, where also he doesn't say anything to her outright, but it really reminds you of when you're mad at someone and like you don't say anything to them, and sometimes they'll be like, "Are you mad at me?" And then you're like, "No," but then you're so like bothered, you showing them that you're mad. It reminds you of like teen girls, but because I do remember that, like, "Oh, you mad?" And you're like, "No, I'm not mad," but then I'm just like going to ignore you and give you the cold shoulder. And then we have Rachel coming up now, Yaakov and Rachel. So now Rachel in chapter 30, page 174, Rachel saw that she had borne Jacob no children. And what's interesting is the next line. She didn't have any children, but it says the next line, she was envious of her sister. And that's really like, I think, a key between the two sisters. Leah is always wanting Yaakov's affection. Rachel totally has that, but she wants children. And they kind of both just want what the other one has, and they both feel like, I think, they should be equal. So Rachel has no children. She's angry. And also, like we saw this a little bit in other stories, when you're mad and you sometimes take it out on your spouse, you take it out on someone, even though they can't necessarily fix your problem. It's not their fault. But she says to Yaakov, give me children or I'm going to die. Yaakov was incensed at Rachel. He gets mad at her and he says, can I take the place of God who has denied you fruit of the womb? So even though we have all this language, like he loves her, he wants to marry her, right? Now we see, after all these years, I think this tension and the stress of Rachel not having children, of Leah always being around, and she's having children one after the other. There's tension, and she yells at him, I think kind of inappropriately, and then he yells back at her also inappropriately, right? There's no sensitivity there. She is saying, giving children, I'm going to die, which is a very extreme statement. And he's like, it's not my fault you're not having kids, right? Also not really so nice. We do have some, if you look on source number 12, we have some commentaries where, right, we're linking Rachel is remembering, and here we go again, right? We have Sarah and Abraham, how did they deal with their infertility issues? Yitzhak and Rivka, Yaakov and Rachel deal with it by kind of just yelling at each other. Rachel, according to Rashi, is saying, how come she was mad at him? Because how come you're not praying for me? Remember, your father, Yitzhak, he prayed for your mother, Rivka, and you're not praying for me. And Yaakov yells back at her, I can't do that because my father could pray for my mother because they had no children at all. But I already have children, so I can't pray for you. It's just, whether you agree with Rashi's or not, it's kind of like insensitive. And we feel kind of, I think, bad for both of them. This is an interesting point, which I read in this book, which is that this idea, I had never linked it before, of her saying this extreme, like, giving children, I'm going to die, that is very reminiscent of what Rivka says when she says to Yitzchak, if Jacob takes a woman from the daughters of Chet, which she says, right, remember, she doesn't want to tell Yitzchak outright that Esau wants to kill Yaakov, so she says, oh, I want to send Yaakov away because I can't have him marry someone from the local, Canaanite women, and she says, if he takes a woman from the daughter of Chet, from the Benot Haaretz, right, from the daughters of the land, what good to me is life? Also, a very extreme, like, what good to me is life? I might as well die if he marries somebody from the local. And Yadisha suggests maybe that was very triggering for Yaakov. He remembers that was the last thing his mother said. And that brings up, his whole, I had to run away, I'm guilty, look what's happened to me here. And so he lashes out at Rachel. I did find that interesting. I never thought of that before. This because I think you might say, she's so upset. Sometimes you say things that are very extreme when you're upset and you don't really mean them, but perhaps that was triggering. There's also, right, what happens right afterwards. She says, okay, here's my maid Bilhah, sleep with her, consort with her, and then, she'll have children, and I too, there on my knees, and through her, I may have children. And in Hebrew, the Ibaneh Gam Anochi Mimena, which is the same language we had when Sarah gives Hagar to Avram. So then we have this other kind of repeat, which is always fascinating. That idea never fully worked out for Sarah and Avram, but Rachel is willing to give it a try. And in a footnote in this book, which I put for you here, she says, maybe Rachel is going back to the event of Hagar and Sarah, and she is saying, I'm going to be like Sarah. Maybe I'm going to be the matron like Sarah, and the other children that you have, which maybe she's saying like Leah's children, they're going to be the second class ones, right? Whoever I have will be the first class ones, and whoever they have will be the second class ones. And maybe she's kind of reinventing that, kind of reconfiguring, getting that story in again. Okay, next, last story we're going to have. Okay, so we have Rachel has no children, but she gives her maid to Bilhah, and Bilhah has a son, and she has another son, and then, right, so now it's if you're keeping score, Leah has 4, and Bilhah, who's Rachel's maid, has 2. And then what does Leah do? She says, this is page 176 on the top. When Leah saw that she had stopped bearing, she took her maid Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a concubine. So I find this fascinating. Now it becomes there's this jealousy. She has 4 kids. Okay, so she stopped bearing kids. Rachel still really has 0, and she has her concubine, has 2, which is I don't know how we can have those kids exactly, but they're not 100% like hers. And Leah's I really feel like it's like a fight, right? Like she's like, oh, you're gonna give your maid? No, hold on, I'm gonna give my maid too. And then Yaakov's not even like in the picture. He's just like, sleep with me, sleep with her, now you, right? And it's really this competition between the sisters. So there's like, there's all this tension like between all the different people floating around this house. And then we come to the last story, which ties into the sisters. Verse 14, once at the time of the wheat harvest, Reuben came upon some mandrakes in the field. So mandrakes in Hebrew called dudaim are known to be like some kind of plant that helps with fertility. And he brings them to his mother Leah. So you assume that Reuben here is a smallish child, but remember he's the oldest. So, he's the oldest, let's say he's 7 or 5, he's picking up that there's tension, right? There's tension. And you can imagine that maybe Leah is using these mandrakes because the only thing that kind of works for her to connect with Yaakov at all is to have children. So as the child, he's like, well, I want to make my mom happy. I'm going to bring her these dudaim. Rachel says to Leah, please give me some of your son's mandrakes. And this is where we see Leah in her like full kind of mean glory, right? Rachel is like, just share them with me. But she said to her, was it not enough for you to take away my husband, that you would also take away my son's mandrakes? Very harsh. And also, she didn't really take away anything. She didn't take away Rachel's husband, but she feels that way, that Rachel is always taking the affection. And then Rachel says, I promise he shall lie with you tonight in return for your son's mandrakes. When Jacob came home from the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, you are to sleep with me, for I have hired you with my son's mandrakes. And he lay with her that night. And then she has more children, Issachar and Zvulun. And then she has Dinah. Okay, so that's also like, you see this story that at some point, even though Yaakov, I think, always did love Rachel, but then there's that tension about the children, which we saw, with Sarah and Rachel, and there's the jealousy between the two sisters, so much so that like Yaakov becomes just like the sperm donor. Like he's like, hey, you're coming back tonight, you're with me. Usually you might think maybe he more often goes with Rachel if he feels more affection towards her, but she's like, no, I hired you tonight. Look, I got the mandrakes, I have the deal, I made a deal. And then and a little bit, he's like, okay, like he's always a little bit like, okay. And again, we see no one is really saying what they feel. And then finally, God remembers Rachel. And we'll end here, right, in this part. God remembers Rachel. He opens her womb. She conceives and bears a son. God has taken away my disgrace, and she names him Yosef, which is to say, may the Lord add another son for me, which is a fascinating name that she gives him. Here's Rachel. She finally has a child after all this time. And what is her naming? I want another one. Right? Not enough. One, because there's this like theme of this competition with Leah. Now Leah has 6. Okay, forgetting the shvach, the concubine's children, because they're just 2 and 2 and they're equal. But she has 6 and I only have 1. And like, it's like, I need to catch up. Right? I need to catch up. So, there's no, like you would expect, maybe she would say, like a Yehuda type name, right? My husband and I, like something beautiful. And she's saying, I need to have another child. And then, eventually she does have Binyamin, but that's a very sad story too, because she has him she dies in childbirth when she has him. She actually, just about the naming, she names him, everyone maybe doesn't know this part, you have to read it inside, right? She names him Ben Oni.
Ben who?
Ben Oni. It says that
right.
she names him Ben Oni, which is son of suffering, like, and then Yaakov
Like
renames
Reuven.
him, like Binyamin, the son of.
Reuven is all my suffering.
Yes, she keeps
Yeah.
that one. But Yaakov does not like that last name, and he changes
I
his
wonder
name
why.
to Binyamin. So just a side point about, names like that. So we see, just to sum up, that in this dynamic that we have of Yaakov with his family, right? And everything always comes from, your baggage that you bring with you. So he has brought that whole story of him and his relationship with his father, which wasn't really forthcoming. His parents were not forthcoming with each other. And then there's that, the stealing with the bracha, which leaves a lot of, unprocessed feelings. And then he's in this household where he's kind of stuck in the middle with Lavan and Rachel and Leah. And then you see that after he has Yosef, the next part is that he will try to leave. Maybe he recognizes, like,
enough.
I got it, and he's actually, it doesn't say that anyone ever calls him back. He just on his own, although it's many, many years, right, he will then finally, leave Lavan's house. But we have seen, right, then Yaakov, we'll see next time, is going to take his baggage, and sadly, it's going to then, spill over into his own children. Although nicely, what we do not see with Yaakov and his children is we will see nobody we will have the favoritism issue, but we will not see any of the children pushed aside. I remember that we have Ishmael and Yitzchak, and Ishmael is rejected. Then we have Yaakov and Esav is rejected. Then we have Yaakov's children. None of his children will be totally rejected, although we will have, the favoritism of Yosef, which we will talk about next week. So thank you all for coming.
That was good, thank you.
And have a good night, a good week.